I am speaking to you from Manhattan, New York City, uh, and I want to begin by saying that the point and purpose of what I have to say to you today uh, is hopefully going to give you a framework, a context for many things that you have thought, things you have felt, that maybe worried you that you were overreacting or maybe it was just you. And I'm here to tell you that we as a nation are going through one of the great historical changes of the history of this country and quite possibly of the whole world. You know, change is always happening, but sometimes it happens in a highly condensed, very fast way. Oftentimes, people who complain that everything is changing but so slowly, only to discover someone who points out, yeah, but remember this period when it changed real fast, and before you know it, it changes again quickly. It is changing now quickly. And that's because a lot of problems kicked down the road are not kickable anymore. A lot of changes that built slowly are now in a kind of crescendo. And because a lot of this change is frightening to a lot of people, one of the most remarkable things about it is the enormous amount of denial that is going on that these changes are happening. So bear with me as I go through telling you what I think the big changes are and why I think we are in the midst of them. Okay, let's begin. I'm going to divide the evidence of big changes into two parts. The first part will be international, and the second part will be national, what's going on here in the United States. The international, well, in a way, that's easy, if a little scary. For most of the last 75 years, which means pretty much the lifetime of you and me, the United States in the larger world has been an enormously powerful country. For many of those years, clearly the most powerful economically, politically, militarily, ideologically. And that was for no surprised reason. It had to do with World War II. In World War II, not only was fascism defeated, but every country that might have been a competitor for the United States' position as top dog was busy destroying every other one. So when the war was over in 1945, Britain, France, Germany, Italy destroyed, Japan destroyed, China and Russia likewise. The United States emerged unscathed. In fact, the war had put Americans back to work after the 1930s Great Depression had made so many millions of our fellow citizens unemployed and poor. In the war, I like to teach my students, we took half of the millions unemployed and put them in a uniform, and we took the other half of the unemployed and gave them jobs making the uniforms. Anyone with half a brain and a little knowledge of history would have known that the situation of the United States at the end of World War II was an anomaly, couldn't possibly last, could never be the dominant country. Why? Because no other country in the history of the human race that ever occupied a dominant position kept it. Every empire that was born evolved and died, and there was no reason ever to imagine the United States would not follow the same pattern. But 1945, when it came, the end of the war, put the United States in this incredible position. Here we were, a country with less than 5% of the world's people, yet we produced half of the world's output, accounted for half of the world's trade. The US dollar became a global currency beyond even what the British pound sterling had been. Roosevelt died, and the American century, as optimists called it, was underway. And Americans did what others have done. They believed it wasn't temporary, that it was perfect, that it was, if you were religious, God's preference for America, the exceptionalism of America, and on and on and on. Very popular themes in the 1940s and 50s and 60s. And if you follow our news today, you'll know it's alive and well in many parts of the United States to this day. But that is not accurate. In recent years, the last 2 or 3 decades, the United States international position has started to quickly revert to what it was long before World War II. I don't have much time, so I'm going to give you only some of the milestones. The last 4 wars that the United States has engaged in, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, and now Ukraine, we have lost each and every one of those wars. The enemy in Vietnam was the Communist Party of North Vietnam. What rules in Vietnam today is the Communist Party of North Vietnam. They won, we lost. In Afghanistan, the enemy was the Taliban. Who rules Afghanistan today? The Taliban. They won, we lost. I could go on, but you get the picture. And if you were not bamboozled by American mass media, you would know what everyone else in the world knows, which is that the war in Ukraine is over, the Russians won, and Ukraine and the West was defeated. That's not the sign of a hegemonic empire in control. That's a sign that the empire is over and it's not coming back. Along the way, the United States went from the dominant economic power, which gathered around it allies. They're called the G7, the group of 7. And just so we're all clear, they include Canada, Japan, Britain, France, Germany, and Italy, the United States and its allies. Arguably the center of the world economy for much of the last 75 years, but no longer. In the year 2020, another economic powerhouse caught up. That powerhouse is called the People's Republic of China and its allies, who are called the BRICS, BRICS, named after the 5 countries that started that alliance. Much bigger than 5 now, but those 5, their acronym: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. In the year 2020, if you add up the GDP, that's a number we use in economics. It's a simple number, rough idea. It's a total output in 1 year of goods and services in a country. If you add in 2020 the GDP of the United States and our G7 allies, it was roughly equal to the GDP of the People's Republic of China and its BRICS allies. Since 2020, the growth of China and its allies has meant that the gap between China and its allies economically, total output of goods and services, has grown larger each year, as it is growing larger this year, and as it will grow larger again next year and into the foreseeable future. China and its allies have been growing faster than the United States every year for the last 25, and they have now caught up and gone further. If you add up the GDP of the United States and our allies, it's about 28% of world output. If you do the same for China and the BRICS allies, it's 35% of the world's output. We are not the economic powerhouse of the world. We are not the richest country. We're not any of those things that our leaders keep saying in a kind of mantra that should remind you of people who cope with a changed reality by telling themselves it never changed. The change is there, whether you need to deny it or not. Every country in the world right now, every company engaged in world trade right now is rethinking its strategy to take account of where the wealth now is. It's in China and the BRICS, growing faster than it is in the quote unquote mature economies of the United States and the West. If I had time, I would dwell on this because the implications touch you in every part of your life, but I don't. So I'm going to kind of go fast forward and talk about the national symptoms of all of this change that's building to a crescendo. First, we have a level of division in our society that you all notice when you pick up the newspaper any day. What is that about? That's partly a reaction. We're not the king of the hill anymore. And what has happened is that various parts of our country are busy blaming other parts because they can't face what is actually going on here. Southerners blame the North. We see a recurrence of divisions we thought we had put behind us. White supremacy, ethnic hatred, extraordinary what we are watching. And what frightens us, the return of a kind of Christian fundamentalism that wants to exclude everybody who isn't a white or a Christian. Hostility between our Republican and Democratic political parties. Mass alienation of the people from those parties, because glimmering in the background is an awareness that these parties are part of what is in the past that is no longer with us. It's the way we feel our way towards a recognition of what we're busy denying. I'm talking to you from New York City. I'm going to give you one symptom. Less than 2 weeks ago, the people of New York elected and voted for a mayor. We do that all the time, every 4 years. Who is the mayor? Zoran Mamdani, a young Muslim socialist who doesn't run away from those labels, ran on them, appealed to the city of New York, A man who, when asked what he would do as mayor if Benjamin Netanyahu visited New York, answered, I will arrest him. New York has the largest Jewish community, I believe, outside of Israel. Mr. Mamdani didn't just win the election. He got over 50% of the vote. He defeated all of the other candidates combined with his vote, including Mr. Cuomo, who's part of the Clinton Obama Democratic hierarchy, defeating the Republicans. Mr. Trump endorsed Mr. Cuomo, made no difference, may have even hurt him. That's not a vote for socialism on the part of many people who are just beginning to learn again about what socialism is. This was a vote against the status quo, against the history of Republicans and Democratic people running New York City for the same core of wealthy people that have run that city for the last 2 centuries. New York is the home to more billionaires than any other city in the United States. And they gave an enormous amount of money against Mr. Mamdani, and that didn't help them either. That's a sign of big change. And a word about the socialism part. We are witnessing, and this is another sign of change, the return of socialism. I'm very determined to make sure you understand my choice of the word return. Because before World War II, if you know your American history, socialism was everywhere. New York newspapers embarrassed themselves when they wondered out loud what in the world a socialist mayor would mean, as if it were a new event. Hundreds of American cities have had socialist mayors. That's not a new phenomena at all. When were they? Before World War II. You see, after World War II, we had the Cold War, and we worked as a nation to erase, to expunge, to repress everything having to do with socialism or communism or Marxism or anarchism or any of that. And if you haven't lived long enough or you didn't learn your history, you might have imagined it was always that way. It wasn't. Mr. Mamdani has hundreds of forerunners who were mayors of American cities. Bridgeport, Connecticut, nearby, not up, an hour up the road, long time, socialist mayor. Milwaukee, Wisconsin, I could go on. And if you want other examples, go to Europe where there are not 100, thousands of cities and towns run by socialists. And they haven't blown up, and they haven't disappeared, and they're not disasters or none of it. That's another sign. It's called in psychology the return of the repressed, which is not a name for a horror movie. It's a name for the historical change that is exploding all around us. And now I come to the second half of my talk, because another one of the signs of rapid change is the phenomena of Donald Trump. And I want to turn now to what it is he's doing that will demonstrate to you what's at stake in this period of intense change. Okay, I understand and I know, and you're quite right, that Mr. Trump appears to many of you as somebody who's scary or who's very changeable or who's a bit of a narcissist, or whatever words you want to use. And all of that is correct. But I'm not dealing with that kind of question. I'm trying to understand what are the deeper impulses that shape him like they shape all the rest of us, even though they shape him in a unique way. Okay, let's begin. Mr. Trump's entire political career has nothing to do with the Republican and Democratic parties because he was a disinterested, unimportant figure in both of them. He gave money to both of them because money was the one thing he had that they were interested in. They were never interested in him. Neither of them ever chose him to be a candidate for anything, ever, anywhere. How did he then become the president, given what I've just told you and which I'm sure you knew? He figured a way out to take advantage, political advantage, of an awful lot of people in the United States who felt hurt and damaged and denied and ignored and excluded over the last 30 to 40 years. People who had been treated that way, who had appealed to either Republicans or Democrats to hear them, to do something for them, and were ignored. So I have to begin by telling you who these people are, telling you their story, because otherwise you will not understand Trump and all the ways that the Trump period is affecting you and Boston and the church and every other part of all of the lives we lead. The people who he appealed to, whose pain he figured out how to use, are mostly white, Christian, male factory workers in the American South and lower Midwest and scattered around the country. For the last 30 or 40 years, their situation has been savaged. What do I mean? Two major phenomena, and I'll be brief because I don't have the time. Two major phenomena hurt them. One was the technological revolution here: computers, robots, and artificial intelligence, which took away their jobs. Number two was the movement of American industry out of the United States, and from where mostly? The South and the Midwest, and scattered elsewhere, which left the United States, above all for China, but secondarily India, Brazil, and so on. That meant their jobs disappeared. And whose jobs were they? The best paid workers in America, the unionized, male, white factory workers whose struggles against capitalists had got them some of the highest wages in the world. The foundation of the so-called middle class that Americans like to believe they belong to. They had promised each other, men and women, the American dream. They can't afford it anymore. They had promised their children not only that dream, but that the children would live better than the parents. Can't deliver that, not anymore. So depressed are the children of these workers that they are among the hundreds of thousands who kill themselves with synthetic opioids every year. Where? In just those areas. They are full of rage. When you hear MAGA, think of that. Nobody helped them. Nobody spoke to them. Until a politician suddenly emerged for them and for us, who was able to demonstrate I'm different from all of these Republicans and Democrats that you're used to. And how am I going to show it to you? I'm going to descend an escalator in New York City to open my campaign by giving a speech in which I say things like Mexicans in our country are all rapists. He said such things. He became famous. And quickly, as fast as you can imagine, he was clearly identified as something new and different because conventional politicians don't say things like that. And he said, I'm going to drive these immigrants out. They're the criminals in our country. They're taking your jobs. They're moving into your housing. They're assaulting your children. And all made believe, make believe. None of it didn't matter. It spoke to something. We're the excluded. And then he would go on and build it. You're excluded. You're ignored. You're hurt. And what is the country worrying about? Making it up to the women who have been discriminated against, making it up to the black and brown people who have been. What about us? Was the white, Christian, urban, male factory workers' lament. Nobody dared say anything. Trump, all alone, said it himself. Now, Trump understood, he is a billionaire, he understood that both the Democratic and Republican parties depend on rich donors for their lives. So he knew that he would have to appeal to this angry, rageful, hurt population without attacking the donors. He had to get the donors to give him money because he didn't threaten them at all. He wasn't going to hurt them. He wasn't going to help those people who had been screwed by doing anything to the donor class. Don't worry, I'm one of you. I'll take care of you. No, he had to find scapegoats. He had to pander to the rage of the hurt by blaming it on everybody other than the donors. So he blamed it on immigrants. He blamed it on Muslims. He blamed it on the Chinese. He blamed it on foreigners. He blamed it on America being cheated around the world by all the people. Even our nice allies in Canada and Mexico are out to get us. Yeah, he speaks to people who felt that way. But remember always, he never could talk down the donors, which was not an easy task. Because if you ask the question, who makes the decision to install a new technology that deprives people of their jobs? You know what the answer is? The employer class. They're the ones who decide what to do with technology, how to install it, who to fire, when to fire. That's the employer class. And now here's a funny coincidence. If you ask yourself, who makes the decision to close the factory in Cincinnati and open it in Shanghai? It turns out it's the employer class. They make that decision. According to the US Census, employers are 3% of the American people. Oh my goodness. The same 3% did it with the technology and did it with relocating jobs abroad. It's obvious who the mass of angry white, Christian, unionized workers should be angry at. And Mr. Trump figured out if he could redirect their rage against Mexicans and foreigners and Chinese, he would be doing the donor class a fantastic service. And they loved him, and they still love him because that's what he did. He went even further. He said to the donor class, "You give me the money so that I can sustain my demonization of this scapegoats to hold on to the MAGA population. I'll take care of you if you elect me." What was the first thing he did in his first term? It was the tax cut of December 2017. And what was the first thing he did this year when he took office for the second time? It was that thing you read about called the Big Beautiful Tax Bill. The first thing both times to take care of the most important part of this story. Only after he had given them a tax cut did he give them other things they want. Because they want, the donor class, they want really two things. Don't tax us. Give the minimum to the mass of people you have to. And if you have to spend more than you raise in taxes, because you're afraid if you tax the average people, they'll vote you out. If you tax the donors, they won't give you money. So you're trapped. And the politicians of this country have found over the last 30 years the solution to that dilemma. You don't tax and you don't stop spending. And you handle that by borrowing. You borrow the difference between what you tax and what you spend. That otherwise you couldn't spend it. You have to get it somewhere. So you borrow it. But here comes the joke. And if you've never got this joke before, remember it. It'll help you understand what's going on. Here's the joke. Where do you think the government goes to borrow the money? And the answer is mostly to corporations and the rich. And you know why they have the money to lend to the government? Because they don't pay taxes. That's the joke. Only the joke is on you. Because eventually, if you keep borrowing, and in case you don't know it, we have been borrowing like nobody. The United States, the biggest debtor nation in the world. We have no competition there at all. We're drowning in debt. Our debt is so bad that the three companies in the world that assess the credit worthiness of all corporations and all countries, though three American firms, one is called Standard and Poor, one is called Moody's, you may have heard of them, and the third is called Fitch. All are American companies, and all of them, over the last couple of years, have reduced the credit worthiness of the United States government from AAA, the best you can have, which we used to have, to AA. All three of them. Are there other countries that still have AAA? Yup. It's too dangerous to lend to the United States. Why? And this is a very important point, folks. There's a long history of countries that borrow and keep borrowing because they can't or won't tax their own people or their own businesses. Eventually, they borrow so much that their creditors say, no more. And why do the creditors say that? They say it because they can see what's coming. A moment when the people of a country are told by their government, we can't provide you with food, clothing, and shelter because we need the money to repay our creditors the interest and the principal we owe them. At which point the people rise up and say, you're not going to starve my children to take care of the rich creditors. No, 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 no. At which point the politicians lose their job and are lucky if they don't lose their head. And the creditors get told, you wait. Wow. You know what the creditors of the United States are worried about? That. And if you think that's far away, stop. Mr. Trump is trying to not pay out the money owed to the people on the SNAP program in this country as I speak to you. The poorest of the poor who rely on food stamps. Why? Because our debt is so big, it's costing us now roughly as much as our entire defense budget. Oh my God, what's going to happen? If you really don't feed those people, if you really cut back, and notice Mr. Trump has been trying to show the creditors that he's trying to do something. The first 4 months of his regime, he treated us to a piece of political theater called the Department of Governmental Efficiency. I'm an economist. I've worked on efficiency studies all my life. They're complicated, they take a long time, and they require careful examination. What Elon Musk did was fire large numbers of people and call that efficiency and nothing to do with efficiency. But it does solve something. It saves the government money. So we don't have a Department of Education, and we're not giving foreign aid. And our airplanes are all crazy because we don't have air traffic control, but we're paying interest to the creditors. When the theater of efficiency was over, he gave us another theater called the governmental shutdown. What was that about? Stop spending money. Shutting down had the same function as efficiency. Don't be fooled. Easy for me to say, Mr. Trump works overtime with a very big staff to fool us, but we don't need to be fooled. What's the sum total of what I'm telling you? Mr. Trump should be understood in this context. He is desperate. And I won't even get to the Epstein files, which is the least of his worries, even though it may take the job from him. And why is this happening? Because we're in a period of catastrophic change. For the first time in your lifetime, every one of you that's watching or listening, for the first time in your lifetime, the United States has a powerful, successful competitor. We haven't had that before. They were all laid prostrate by the Second World War, as I mentioned before. But now we have an enormously successful, rapidly growing powerhouse, China. That changes everything. And they're gaining and they're growing. This year, the United States will grow its GDP maybe 2%, 2 point something percent. China's growth this year, 5%. Do you understand? It's relentless. Russia didn't win the war in Ukraine all by itself. It won it because right behind it is China. When the United States and the Europeans thought they could cripple Russia by not buying the oil and gas whose exports Russia depends on, Russia smiled. and turned to India and China and said, would you mind buying our oil and gas for a while we take care of this war? No problem. Mr. Modi and Mr. Xi Jinping made that decision, as everyone should have understood they would. The United States said, we will sanction you. They laugh. Only Americans take these threats seriously because they don't want to face what it is I'm trying to get across here. We are in a new world, and denial is not an adequate response. We are headed on a collision course. Mr. Trump, who ran, and I have no reason to doubt his sincerity on this point, who ran his campaign saying, among other things, I want to end these endless wars. You remember? He was going to end Ukraine in a day or two, and he was going to fix everything in Gaza, and he was going to this, that, and the other thing. He hasn't, none of it. Ukraine war has proceeded. He didn't solve it in a week, and he didn't solve it with a phone call. He just didn't solve it. And about endless wars, he attacked Iran. That's not ending a war, that's provoking one. He has threatened the president of Mexico to invade that country, ostensibly to deal with drugs. He has threatened Canada to make it a 51st state. He has threatened Denmark to take Greenland away from it. He recently threatened Nigeria because he doesn't like the way Muslims and Christian attack Christian churches. And as you know, he has moved huge amounts of our military right off the coast of Venezuela and threatens to attack that. This is militarism gone nuts, and it's very hard not to see this, which you can be sure is how the Russians and the Chinese and the rest of the world see this, as the desperate effort of someone caught in a very difficult situation to find some place where he can recoup his identity as the savior, the one who's going to fix it for those angry people, his MAGA supporters, and for a skeptical American public. A nice new war, at least for a while, might do that. Now, the last step, and then I'll stop. Where do the tariffs fit in? Well, here you got to admire it because it's a little complicated, but I think I can simplify it for you. Excuse me. Tariff is a tax. You should all be aware it's just a name of a tax of a particular kind. It's a tax levied on anything produced outside the United States that's brought into the United States to be sold and consumed here. The tariff affects only that. So, for example, wine produced in Napa Valley and sold all over the United States doesn't have a tariff. Wine produced in France or Italy or Australia that comes to the United States, it does pay the tariff because it's an imported item. And the ostensible purpose of all of this was two things. One, he was going to make businesses come to the United States because they would want to produce it here, no tariff, rather than wherever they were, tariff. They'd escape the tariff. You know, if you don't want to go on the turnpike and pay the fee, you can go the side roads and you can get there without paying the fee. It's a very simple idea. So he said, I'm going to bring jobs back to America. And the number two function of tariffs, being a tax, was to help the government be less needy of borrowing because it would get a new revenue source. You might even say, wow, since the people who pay tariffs are import businesses in America, it's a tax on business. And you heard me say a few minutes ago, can't tax the donor class, can't tax the businesses. But remember, the tariff only hits the importing business, number one. And number two, he gave them a huge tax cut before he imposed the tariff. So they come out pretty good. And what the people who get a tariff do, of course, is to raise the price, which is why our inflation continues. The importing company raises the price to the retailer so they don't get hurt by that tariff. They pass it on. And Mr. Trump's advisors should have known this because tariffs are hundreds of years old. I teach courses in international trade, and a section of the course is the tariff. And we teach the students, based on the experience of many countries over many years, when do tariffs work? When do they fail? Mr. Trump presented the tariff as though it were an unquestionable good thing. It isn't, it wasn't, and he counted on the American media not to teach you what they could have and what they should have. Happens a lot, folks. What did the tariff do? And this is another part of what our dilemma is. The tariff was a declaration by the United States of economic war against every other country in the world. This is an astounding thing to do. If you haven't understood that, you've not been paying attention. It says to the world, you want to do business in the United States, you got to pay a tax to get us. It's not the behavior of an empire that we once were that said we believe in free trade and we're going to make the world a place where anyone with a good idea can start a business and prosper. No, 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 no. All of that's gone. You want to do business in the United States, you pay a tax. Let me give you an example that affects your life, although in a way you may not have known about. About 15 years ago, a competition began around the world. It was a competition who could produce the best, cheapest electric vehicle, a car or a truck that does not run on gasoline, but runs instead on electricity. You all know Elon Musk is the richest man in the world because he did it first. But he didn't win the competition. That's why the Tesla Motor Company is in the trouble it's in now. The competition was won by Chinese company. In case you never heard of it, it's called the BYD, three initials that, by the way, stand for English words. Build your dream. That's what it stands for. The BYD Corporation in China produces by far the best quality, cheapest electric cars and trucks. Are they for sale around the world? Yes. Have they been for sale around the world for some years now? Yes. In Paris, they are part of the taxi fleet. Why have you not seen them? Because in his first term, Mr. Trump hit them with a 25% tariff. Mr. Biden, not to be outdone, raised it to 100%, which is what it is now. So the car cost $30,000. You could get the best electric car for about $30,000. But that's what the money would have to go to China to pay for the car. To pick it up at the dealer here, you'd have to pay the 100% tax, the tariff on that, to Uncle Sam. So you would have to pay $60,000, 30 for the car, 30 for the tariff on the car. You're not going to do that. You're going to settle for a less good car, and you only have to pay maybe 40 or 50 grand to Ford or GM or Tesla or any of the others. But that's very bad for the United States. You know why? Because everywhere else in the world, every competitor of the United States outside this country can buy the best quality truck at the lowest price, 30 grand. Only the American has to pay much more. You know what that means? We're done. The competition is over. We can't. The very steps we take to protect us hurt us. There's been no rush of companies here. They know that Mr. Trump takes the tariff away within weeks after he puts it, or he raises it, or he lowers it. The whole world is laughing this week because Switzerland achieved the reduction of its tariff from 39% to 15%. And you know how they did it? They gave Mr. Trump a gold bar engraved with the numbers of his presidency, worth $130,000. They came here, they gave him the gifts, he dropped it. The whole world laughs because in the rest of the world, this behavior has a name. It's called bribery. But our media will make it a remark here or there, sure. But it's part of the denial. We're at that level that a foreign government can spend what is nothing for it and achieve. We're for sale, folks. This is everything I've told you is not unusual for a declining empire. In the end, and this is my final point, a declining empire usually flames out by going to war to try to recoup in war what is beyond being recouped. And so the war usually goes badly. Toward the end of the Roman Empire, they referred to all the people crowding in and taking over pieces of as savages, as wild tribes. They were none of those things. It's just that they were winning, and Rome could not understand, having been a dominant empire for some centuries, that it was over. We are now a nation that has designated China to be our great adversary, that cannot end the war in Ukraine, even though it knows it's lost, costing still more money, costing still more lives, reducing that poor country to a horrible condition. So the fact is, we face the following. Either we continue the way we've been going, which will end in a war with China and the BRICS. And there is no way for the United States to win such a war. They have nuclear weapons, probably more than we do. China and the BRICS together are over half the population of this planet. The United States is 4.5% of the people on this planet. The United States in G7 is under 20% of the population of this planet. It's over. The next after our decline will either be a Chinese empire or maybe, if we're lucky, the effort we call the League of Nations after World War I or the United Nations after World War II will be the model a genuine multinational agreement among the people of the world so they don't replicate the history I have just tried to summarize. Those are our real choices. But I'm not pessimistic. I'm actually optimistic. I think slowly, painfully, and hesitatingly, we are building in this country to our new political initiative that will go to the people, tell the story we have to say, which I've tried to summarize with and for you this morning, and say we need a new political direction, new political leaders who will sit down with our Chinese counterparts because they, like we, need to avoid the clash from which there is no recovery, nuclear war. And maybe if we take the initiative here, we'll find kindred souls over there who will meet us halfway. And the best argument for that strategy is that it's better than any alternative. Thank you for your attention.